In a world torn apart by swift changes, it is good to see one thing remain certain. Punishment should follow the crime. PACE adopted a resolution on a special tribunal for Russia. From now on, the world has its own political cesspit. Putin's party sort of exists. Shadow fight. Europe has prepared new measures against the Russian oil shadow fleet. Good afternoon. This and more at your ATV studio online with me, Henry Keane, in yet another attempt to bring out truth in easy terms for the whole free world, directly from Ukraine as usual. Minister of Justice Denis Maluska believes that Ukraine and its partners will probably finally compile the end version of the special tribunal structure and international vision of it in regard to the crime of Russian aggression against Ukraine already this autumn. According to Maluska, although they have delayed the progress, recently the countries participating in the discussion have progressed very far. That was a quote. Discussions regarding a special tribunal for the crime of aggression of Russian Federation have been ongoing since 2022, but there has been no practical progress in this issue for a long time indeed. The main reason is that Ukraine was in favor of the creation of an international tribunal, that is, on the basis of an international organization, and key Western allies were more keen on the so-called hybrid format, when the tribunal takes place under Ukrainian legislation instead, but with the support of international partners. And now, early PACE finally adopts a resolution on legal and human rights aspects of the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, full stop, on the creation of a special tribunal for Russia. So what is it about in more detail? The resolution proposes the creation of a special tribunal for Russia on the basis of an agreement between the Council of Europe and Ukraine. In addition, the document speaks on the inevitable necessity to use all tools to bring perpetrators to justice for war crimes. For example, the resolution calls a spade and calls for PACE to recognize the Wagner PMC as a terrorist organization, and PACE approved the document. In approving the said version of resolution, PACE in easy terms says exactly the following. It is no more a special tribunal. From now on, it is the special tribunal. And PACE calls the said special tribunal that has been created by means of the agreement between the Council of Europe and Ukraine as, I quote, the best possible solution in terms of legal framework and political legitimacy, to prosecute Russia's political and military elites for committing the ferocious crime of aggression that led to hundreds of thousands of deaths in Ukraine and hundreds of billions of dollars of damage to civilian infrastructure, environment, and the Ukrainian nation. Resolutions are looking good. Well, don't get me wrong, they are good actually, they are very necessary. It's just one little test you still have to pass before you can allow yourself to enjoy justice. You have to survive first. So, High Commissioner and head of the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, Filippo Grandi, called on countries around the world to help Ukrainians affected by the Russian invasion to survive the third winter of the war. Grandi's statement was made during his next trip to Ukraine. During the visit, he announced a new $100 million aid package to support the displaced and victims of Russian aggression in Ukraine. The announcement was made during a meeting on the energy situation as part of the High Commissioner's third visit to Kharkiv. On that international support, a bit more. I was there in Kharkiv right when Mr. Grandi was there. Only I was on the very front line, about 2 kilometers away from Russian trenches, filming a documentary, performing my duty as Ukrainian filmmaker and war reporter and journalist. And what I can confirm is that it is even a long way of surviving from this summer to that winter that Mr. Grandi speaks about. We have to survive this summer first. It was hell hot over there, 50 Celsius in those woods where we were hiding. So hot that cameras stopped working sometimes, and Russians were bombing and shelling us constantly. So one moment I find myself so tired that I simply lied on the ground and closed my eyes to have a 10-minute nap before the next wave of Russian drones shows up. And it was exactly then when I had an epiphany of sorts. With my eyes closed, in the middle of a suffocating hot summer night, In a rare moment of silence at war, I've clearly felt with all my body and mind, with all my senses, the future is here and right now. I mean it. In Ukraine. Ukraine has a future because it is fighting against the past that Russia is the impersonation of. Some say Ukrainians fight simply because they have no other choice. That is correct. But having no choice but to fight is exactly the choice of a free man. And only those free deserve a better future. It very much looks like all Russian-sponsored xenophobes, fierce fighters against freedom of choice, opinion, human rights, sexual orientation, you name it, have come together in one cesspool. Putin's party throne and now kinda exists and does its best worst to lead anyone who's ready to walk this road of Putin's good intentions straight to hell. A Putin faction that I would call the Pit is not a real faction, of course, and that actually tells you all about its members. They understand precisely that their political careers are doomed the very moment they really enter any official action for Putin. Nevertheless, this dude has emerged in the European Parliament, and they vote against anything anti-Kremlin, and as we all know, everything good is anti-Kremlin, and everything anti-Kremlin is good. So the Pit swarms with the Kremlin-sponsored politicians, xenophobes, fighters against LGBT feminism and any manifestation of freedom. They would love to do it anonymously, but the results of the European Parliament voting on a resolution in support of Ukraine were published all of a sudden, and largest share of the far-right, most radical faction, that is called Europe of Sovereign Nations, ESN, voted against it, of course. Based on the voting results, we now know and learn the names of Kremlin collaborators, literally. Let me give you the darkest Russian stars on European horizon. Meet Pyotr Bystron, whose house was searched recently in a case of corruption and money laundering. He was also previously accused of a small nice gift from Russia with love, just about 20,000 euro. His colleague, Christine Anderson, voted against the resolution, recognizing the Russian Federation as a sponsor of terrorism in the fall. That clearly means Christine Anderson does not have any relative murdered in Bucha or Kharkiv. MEP Marcos Buhait called the introduction of sanctions against the Russian Federation and the supply of weapons to the Kiev regime a bad decision. Well, indeed, obviously it is a bad decision for someone who cares for any other values but human ones. You see, MEP and journalist of sorts Peter Volgin spread Kremlin propaganda on Bulgarian radio in February 2023. Radio listeners picketed the radio station building demanding Volgin's program to stop broadcasting. I wonder why. Petros Gražulis of Lithuania also showed himself in 2022. A court in Lithuania ruled that he, while a member of Lithuanian Seimas, offered bribes to Russian officials while acting in the interest of a private company. Of course, the majority, 14 out of 25, of this Russian faction, I would call it, are members of the German Alternative for Germany party, whose members maintain close ties with Russian politicians and accepted funds from them. Well, one lovely detail more here. The Bulgarian Revival Party. I love the title. It's also called pro-Russian because 3 politicians of this party joined the new Putin's faction, that I call it. The Pit. In 2022, Bulgarian authorities investigated an open pro-Nazi publication on a party channel with an image of a concentration camp and the caption that literally says, I quote, "If you don't need gas from Russia, come to us and we will let you breathe these gas." I guess this is a perfect slogan for next Putin's election campaign in Russia. Russia's oil and gas revenues grew by 41% in the first half of the year, writes Reuters. Putin is successfully defying the price ceiling on Russian oil exactly with the help of a shadow fleet of tankers that Russia has formed to circumvent sanctions. What is this shadow fleet? Well, nothing mystical or sensational. Here, Russia has created a global network of opaque shell companies that have bought up a significant number of oil tankers, estimated around 1,000, that transport Russian oil to markets primarily in Asia. The point is that the traditionally used ship-owning and insurance companies are working in the dark and are under pressure from Western governments and the threat of sanctions for non-compliance with this price ceiling. They are required to declare contracts for the transport of Russian oil and could face serious problems if it turns out that Russia is using their services to transport that oil sold above the price. Well, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced 44 European countries finally approved tough measures to combat the Russian fleet of tankers used to circumvent sanctions on oil and petroleum products in general, the so-called shadow fleet. That's what it is. Well, that represents approximately 10 to 13% of world's liquid cargo fleet. It carries about 1.7 million barrels of oil per day, generating significant funds to fuel Russia's war machine. Some vessels are also believed to be used to intercept signals or transport weapons, properly believed, if you ask me.
Together with our European partners, we have sent a clear message to those who enable Putin's attempts to circumvent sanctions. We will not allow Russia's shadow fleet and the dirty money it brings to roam freely in European waters and put our security at risk. In the coming months, the UK will go even further to tighten its grip on Putin's war machine. Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
And the United Kingdom is not alone here. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced his intentions to intensify the fight against the oil shadow fleet of the Russian Federation. The German Chancellor noted that Russia is exporting oil to finance the war against Ukraine. Obviously, Scholz emphasized that the oil tankers the Russian Federation uses to transport oil pose a serious risk to the safety of maritime shipping, as well as to the seas and the environment in general. The EU has already reacted with more sanctions. Now we want to join forces in a global coalition to put an end to this shadow fleet, Scholz added. Well, easy to declare the right thing, harder to actually make it work. So what do we do about a shadow? Expose it to the light. Amongst other things, it is possible and necessary to impose sanctions on oil refiners who, unlike carriers, cannot work completely in the dark. This is what Scholz actually suggests doing. Otherwise, not only new revenues to the Kremlin treasury are inevitable, but also large-scale disasters with oil spills due to the poor condition of these tankers and savings on their maintenance and crews. That is it for tonight. It was Henry Keane and our team at Creative English, hopefully to bring some hard truth in easy terms for you tonight. Please like, share and comment. Your voice really matters. Indeed, it helps Ukrainian voice to be shared globally. More to come already tomorrow, so please stay safe and tuned for it. Thank you so very much. Goodbye.